Hi everyone, we're continuing our deep dive into the legendary B-52 Stratofortress. This is part 2 of our tutorial series, where we'll go through the standard procedures for preparing the B-52 for flight, including pre-flight checks, different engine start procedures, takeoff and landing techniques, autopilot operation, and aerial navigation, using both radio beacons and the GPS system. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I highly recommend starting there. In that video, I covered the cockpit layout and explained all major systems and instruments in detail. Let's get started. Before we bring the B-52 to life, let's take a quick look around the cockpit. Both pilot and co-pilot check that circuit breakers are in and safety pins are installed. Make sure ejection seats are safe and all guards are in the closed position. Starting with the pilot's side panel. Overall, confirm that all systems are switched off and all switch covers are closed. Now, step by step. Pylon jettison consent. Guarded. Missile and munitions consent panel. All switches safe. Guards down. IFF antenna selector. Set to both. Anti-skid. On. Guard closed. Mach indicator. On. EMFD display control panel. Mode. Set to EMFD. Hydraulic standby pumps. Off. Rudder and elevator hydraulic pumps, off. Yaw and pitch SAS, disengaged. Steering ratio, takeoff land position. Air brakes, off. Landing gear lever, down and locked. Stabilizer and lateral trim cutout switches, guards closed. Crosswind crab knob, pressed down. Now let's move to the co-pilot's side panel. We'll check all essential systems and fuel controls. Manifold valve, open. Fuel enrichment valve, closed. Generator selector, central bus tie. Battery, off. Fuel system switches, off and closed. Thrust gate checked and stowed. Throttles are fully closed. Drag chute lever checked and locked. Flap lever off. Finally, set the clocks on both sides, pilot and co-pilot, to the same time. This is important for synchronized procedures during startup and navigation. Let's make one last visual sweep. Verify the cockpit is clean, no covers or tools left behind. Everything looks good. We're ready to start configuring the aircraft for engine start. All right, now let's prepare the aircraft for engine start. This section takes a few minutes in real time. Follow the checklist step by step, just like the crew. First, let's power up the cockpit. Co-pilot, battery switch on. You'll see both battery discharge lights come on. That's normal. Forward and aft batteries are now powering the essential buses. Now, move the emergency DC power switch to emergency for a quick check. Wait a few seconds for the lights to transfer, then back to normal. Next, power up the interphone. Interphone power switch on. Check internal communication with your co-pilot. Both sides should hear each other clearly. Now, connect with the ground crew. Make sure the headset or ground line is active. Confirm clear communication before continuing. Next, bring the gyro power on. You'll see the flight instruments begin to wake up. Artificial horizons, compass, and ADI indicators should start aligning. Give them a few seconds. Let the gyros stabilize. Now, turn on external power. That's on the co-pilot's panel. When connected, the external power circuit breaker position indicator will close, and both battery discharge lights will go out. That confirms the aircraft is now powered by the ground unit. Just a quick note about external power in MSFS. Ground power is only available at designated parking stands, equipped with GPU support. If you're parked on a remote ramp, this option may not appear in the ground services menu. Run an anti-skid system test. Flip the anti-skid test switch to test confirm light response, then return to normal. Transponder, set to standby. Codes loaded, radios on. Now test all warning and indicator lights. Press and hold the light test buttons on the central caution panel. The EVS panel. All lights should illuminate. And radar altimeter. Oxygen quantities, checked. Navigation and anti-collision lights, on, steady and bright. Now confirm with the ground crew. Connections clear, bomb doors clear, and all access panels secure. Next, let's check fuel quantity. Before we continue, let's set up our fuel balance. Open the fuel configuration menu and load the required amount of fuel. For simplicity, I will set all tanks to 80%. This gives us a fuel weight of 257.4 thousand pounds, and our takeoff weight becomes 442.7 thousand pounds. Now we compare these numbers with the fuel totalizer to confirm the correct load. Here we can also set the reference for landing speed using this simple calculator. On the inner scale, place our takeoff weight at the reference pointer, and on the outer scale, the pointer will show the landing speed. In this case, our landing speed is 167 knots. We will also use this number as a reference during takeoff. Co-pilot presses the fuel quantity test button to verify gauge response. Co-pilot reads each tank's amount to the pilot, who records the numbers in the fuel log. Fuel should be loaded symmetrically. If the actual load differs from the planned amount, recompute stabilizer trim. Now let's set up radios. Pilot checks VOR and TACAN systems. Set nav mode to VOR. Tune and identify a station. Bearing pointer should center on the needle. CDEI should move smoothly. Then navigation knob to TACAN mode. Then tune to TACAN station and verify distance readout. Then rotate the course knob 90 degrees to confirm to from reverses. Meanwhile, co-pilot checks both primary and secondary communication radios and obtains the current altimeter setting.
Las Vegas Airport information, November 1900 Zulu.
Next up, radar altimeters, test them, then set to off until ready for taxi. Cross-check main and standby altimeters. Both should read the same field elevation. Then reset to local pressure. Hydraulics next. Set rudder and elevator hydraulic switches to on. Watch the 4 indicator lights go out as pressure builds. Ground crew confirms cooling airflow. All systems normal. Now, move the control column fully forward and back. The ground observer confirms elevator deflection. Then pedals full left, full right. Rudder moves correctly. Return both to center. Now switch on the 4 standby pumps for the left and right hydraulic systems. Check the aileron function, which on the B-52 is provided by the spoiler panels on both wings. Move the yoke to the left, then to the right. The ground crew confirms that the corresponding spoilers extend on each wing. Air brake check. Move air brake to position 6. Ground crew reports inboard 60 degrees and outboard 50 degrees. Air brake lever off. Ground confirms all air brakes down. Flaps. Check full movement, then set up and lever off. When the aircraft is parked, normal flap position is fully extended. This helps relieve hydraulic pressure and prevents wing twist during long ground stays. Hydraulic standby pumps off. Let's configure the fuel panel according to the current fuel distribution. This is handled by the co-pilot. Before we move on, let's take a moment to talk about the fuel system panel. At first glance, it looks huge and complicated. But the truth is, the diagram printed on it explains almost everything by itself. Each fuel gauge on this panel corresponds directly to a specific tank, and the tanks are laid out on the diagram in the same order they exist in the real aircraft. So just by looking at the names and positions, you can immediately visualize where each tank is physically located. In this quadrant, we have the 4 main fuselage tanks: the forward body tank, center body tank, mid body tank, and aft body tank. These carry a large portion of the aircraft's internal fuel. On both sides of the fuselage tanks, we see the primary wing tanks. Each wing has 2 main tanks, and each of those tanks feeds its own dedicated pair of engines. Their pumps are numbered 1 through 4, matching the engine numbers on each side. Farther outboard, on each wingtip section, we see 2 more tanks: the outboard wing tank and the external tank. The external tanks on the B-52 are not jettisonable, and they also serve as mass dampers. Basically, they add weight to the wingtips to reduce wing flutter. Fuel from these tanks is used last, and when they're empty, the aircraft actually has additional speed limitations. These 4 electrically driven pumps I mentioned earlier are the primary feed pumps. They supply fuel to the engines and must be on before engines start, and they stay on for the entire flight. All the other switches are fuel valves. The ones marked with a directional arrow are active valves, meaning they can pump fuel in the direction of the arrow. They can either pull fuel out of a tank or push fuel back into it. The valves marked with a simple line are passive valves. They can only be opened or closed, no active pumping. By combining these valves and pumps, you can configure the fuel system to match the aircraft's required balance for different parts of the mission. For example, let's transfer fuel from the outboard wing tank to the external tank. We set this valve to outflow and this one to inflow. Now you'll see the fuel level rising in the external tank while the outboard tank decreases. If we reverse the valve positions, we pump the fuel back the opposite direction. During flight, the co-pilot uses dedicated fuel management tables to monitor fuel distribution and keep the aircraft properly balanced. It's an active process throughout the mission. For our takeoff today, we'll keep things simple and follow the standard configuration. If tanks 1 and 4 are above the green band, and both center wing and aft body tanks contain 2,000 pounds or more each, set switches 1, 2, 3, and 4 to on. Open valves 13 and 16 and set 26 and 28 to engine feed. If tanks 1 and 4 are above the green band, but either center wing or aft body has less than 2,000 pounds, we will need to open valves 9, 10, 11, and 12. If either tank 1 or 4 is within the green band, same setup applies: switches 1 through 4 on and valves 9 through 12 open. After setting the panel, double-check that the valve indicators match the switch positions. This configuration ensures proper fuel feed symmetry before engines start. Next, confirm gyro instruments are live and synced. Check horizontal situation display heading and make sure your gyro heading matches the aircraft compass. If it's off, press synchronization button. Set steering ratio to taxi, and windshield anti-icing and defog to normal. And finally, perform the crew report. Pilot presses the emergency alarm switch to Abaddon and calls crew report. Each crew member, from navigator to instructor pilot, responds. Check complete. Ground crew verifies alarm system function in the bomb bay and reports back to the pilot. Once the crew report is done, the ground crew closes the entry door. Light goes out on the pilot's panel. They install the starter cartridges and confirm bomb doors closed. The aircraft is now fully configured and ready for engine start. Before we start the engines using cartridges, there's one important step specific to the simulator. On the glare shield panel, open the options menu and enable cartridge installation. If you're planning initial pneumatic start, this same menu is where you enable the ground air supply station. This procedure can be used for simultaneous 8-engine cartridge starts, or any combination of cartridge and pneumatic starts. In this tutorial, we'll start engines 3 through 6 simultaneously using cartridges. Before touching the ignition system, check that all engine starter switches are in their correct positions. A master starter switch in middle position marked Flight. And make sure all throttles are fully closed. Cartridges will not fire with throttles open. Pilot announces starting engines 3 through 6. On the co-pilot side, set starter switches for engines 4, 5, and 6 to start. Engine 3's starter is also verified in start. Now the ignition cycle's co-pilot moves the start selector to cartridge momentarily and immediately returns it to flight. You'll hear the cartridge firing sequence, and engines begin to spool up. As each engine reaches 15% RPM, smoothly move that engine's throttle to idle. Pilot handles throttles for engines 3 and 4. Co-pilot handles throttles for engines 5 and 6. As each engine passes 45% RPM, co-pilot places its starter switch to continues position. Allow the engines to stabilize. If external electrical power is not connected, pause here. We need to bring at least one generator on the line before starting any pneumatic isolated engines. It provides the TR power required to open the outboard strut bleed valves. Once engines stabilize at idle, manually return their starter switches to off. This is an important detail. The starters must be disengaged before we continue. So, return the individual starter switches for engines 3 through 6 to off. This must be done manually. 4 engines are now stable and ready to supply bleed air for the remaining engines. In this tutorial, we'll start engines 1, 2, 7, and 8 using bleed air from the running engines. But remember, the B-52 is capable of starting all 8 engines simultaneously using cartridges. Now let's start the remaining engines, 1, 2, 7, and 8, using bleed air from engines 4 and 5. Before we begin, confirm the bleed air manifold is open. This connects the operating engines to the pneumatic start system. For a proper pneumatic start, advance engine 4 to 90% RPM, and engine 5 to 85% RPM. This provides enough compressed air to drive the starters. Pilot announces, starting engines 1, 2, 7, and 8. Co-pilot places the start selector to pneumatic, and starter switches to start. As each engine reaches 15% RPM, advance its throttle to idle. Pilot handles throttles for engines 1 and 2. Co-pilot handles throttles for engines 7 and 8. As each engine reaches 45% RPM, co-pilot places its starter switch to continue. When all engines are stable, reduce engines 4 and 5 back to idle. Finally, return all remaining starter switches to off. This completes the pneumatic startup sequence. For convenience, we've added 2 dedicated checklists. One for cartridge engine starts, and one for ground air unit starts. You can find them in the checklist menu. Additional procedure sections will be added here in upcoming updates. Now that all 8 engines are up and stabilized, let's finish the post-start checks and get the aircraft ready for taxi. Ground crew will disconnect external air once all engines are stable at idle. This can also be done earlier, right after engines 4 and 5 are started. Co-pilot checks that the starter caution light is off. Then, set the manifold valve to close. We no longer need bleed air distribution for starting. Next, bring all generators online. Momentarily hold each generator switch in the on position. This energizes the generator fields and closes their circuit breakers. Check the generator and bus tie indicators. They should show closed. Ammeter readings should match across the system. Using the voltage and frequency selector, confirm 205 volts, plus or minus 5, and 400 Hz plus or minus 5 on the central tie bus. Leave the selector on central tie bus position. Air conditioning knob set to 7.45 psi, confirming normal pressurization behavior. Ground crew now clears the aircraft for taxi. Body standby, pumps off. Rudder and elevator hydraulics on, and the lights should go out. Pilot checks hydraulic pressure on all systems, looking for 3,000 psi plus or minus 250. Pump out lights must remain off. If icing conditions exist, turn on engine, nacelle, and scoop anti-icing. Use anti-ice if the outside air temperature is 47 degrees Fahrenheit or 8 degrees Celsius or below. invisible moisture is present, or the dew point is within 4 degrees Fahrenheit of the temperature. Let's configure the EVS and mission systems. On the MFD control panel, switch the EVS mode to on. Press both EVS power and STV to on, and set brightness as needed. Then return the MFD control panel selector from EVS mode back to MFD mode. Select the mission route screen on the MFD. Set navigation mode knob to GPS. The mission route screen will display GPS-emulated TACAN data, including station identifier, channel, radial, and DME distance. Perform a quick HSI check. The bearing pointer should point to the selected station, and course information should be valid. Bomb doors. Closed. Ground crew removes wheel chocks and disconnects the interphone. Set anti-collision and navigation lights on and steady. This is the final step before the aircraft begins to move. Switch on the taxi light as we prepare to move. We are ready to taxi. Now that we're moving, let's run the taxiing and before lineup checks. We'll verify aircraft control, configuration, and takeoff settings as we approach the runway. Pilot checks the brakes, make sure the aircraft responds smoothly with no pull to either side. Co-pilot lowers the flaps. We extend them during taxi to ensure clearance from ground equipment. During turns, both pilots check turn and slip indicators, heading indicators, magnetic compass, and the ball should all move correctly. Pilot turns pitot heat on. This prevents airspeed errors during climb. Flaps fully extended, 100% checked on indicator. Fuel panel switches checked. Make sure they match the configuration for takeoff fuel flow. All windows and hatches closed and locked. The hatches not locked light should be out. Radar altimeter set to 250 feet. This is the minimum bailout altitude when all crew members are in ejection seats. Review your takeoff data EPR settings, thrust gate setting, S1 speed and time, and S2 speed. Both pilots should confirm the same numbers. Co-pilot sets the thrust gate according to the takeoff chart. In our case, we'll be using 90% of full thrust. Yaw and pitch SAS, engage. Both indication lights should go out, including the channel fail light. Autopilot power switch, on. We'll arm it for takeoff. Before we continue, let's talk a little about how the B-52 actually handles on the ground. Despite its size, the aircraft is surprisingly agile during taxi. The nose gear can turn up to 55 degrees, which means the Stratofortress can pivot almost on the spot. If you're coming from smaller jets, this might feel completely unnatural at first. But that's exactly how the real airplane behaves. Another important detail, you don't need all 8 engines for taxi. In most cases, crews use only the inner engines, keeping the outer ones at idle to reduce asymmetric forces and keep the wings stable. But for tighter turns, asymmetric thrust becomes a useful tool. Adding a little power on one side helps the aircraft rotate more smoothly around the nose gear. We continue taxi to the runway. In this part of the tutorial, I'll give you a detailed overview of the B-52 navigation systems and explain how the different autopilot modes work. For proper use of navigation systems, it's best to prepare your flight plan in advance, directly in the Preflight menu of Microsoft Flight Simulator. For this demonstration, we'll use a short route dash from Las Vegas, KLAS, to Edwards Air Force Base, KEDW. We'll build the route using the classic VOR-to-VOR navigation. Based on VOR-TAC radio beacons, this is combined VOR and TACAN radio beacon, exactly as real B-52 crews have done for decades. Even though the route is built on VOR waypoints, the aircraft can still follow it using the simulator's built-in GPS system. This is very convenient for new pilots and helps you clearly understand the flight logic. Once the route is ready, it will appear on the navigation display, the MFD. Let's take a closer look at how the MFD works. The multifunction display has 2 main screens, the destination data screen and the mission route screen, also known as the moving map display. Let's start with the navigation information screen. In the center, we see a list of the waypoints from our flight plan. Loading the flight plan may take some time, usually up to 10 or 20 seconds. If you don't see the frequency data after that, you can reload the plan manually. Just switch to edit mode and press reload, then apply. In this same menu, you can also add a new waypoint or delete an existing one. Keep in mind that changes take a few seconds to appear. The reload button restores the original flight plan. The first and last waypoints are airports, marked with the type ARPT. All other points are radio beacons. These can be VOR, TACAN, DME, or their combinations. Next, we see each beacon's ICAO identifier, its frequency, and the corresponding TACAN channel number. Then comes the radial, the calculated heading to the next waypoint, and DME, the estimated distance to that point. At the top of the screen, we have true airspeed, ground speed, wind direction, and velocity drift track, which is the actual course corrected for wind drift, and the current heading. At the bottom, we see the GPS emulation status line. The GPS module in the B-52 is connected to the Integrated Navigation System called OAS. This system emulates TACAN signals, the traditional military radio beacon network. That means pilots see familiar TACAN-style data, bearing, course deviation, distance, on horizontal situation indicator. But all of it is actually generated by the GPS unit. If you see the message not in GPS mode, it means that the flight path is not captured and emulation is currently inactive. So we need to tune radio frequencies manually. I'll explain how to activate GPS mode later in the flight. By pressing the next button, we switch to the moving map display. At the top of the screen, we have the course deviation indicator, distance to the next waypoint, estimated time of arrival, and the current time. This is course deviation markers. If the course markers align, the aircraft is perfectly on track. On the left side, there's information about the active destination point. In our example, DP3, destination point 3, shows the station ICAO identifier, TACAN channel, radial, and distance to the point from our current location. Below that, there's a message line reminding us that the autopilot is not connected to the GPS system now. Then, we see the remaining waypoints with their calculated headings and distances. At the bottom of this section, we have current speed data, true airspeed, ground speed, and wind information. These parameters come from the Integrated Navigation System, and pilots periodically cross-check them. With the analog instruments on the main panel, on the left, we have the moving map itself, with compass, heading indicator, and route display. It looks similar to Boeing-style navigation screens, so I won't go into too much detail. At the bottom of the screen, you can adjust the map scale and switch between different display modes. Now let's go back to our flight plan. As we can see, the system shows that the current destination point is number 3, with the call sign GFS. That happened because we are too close to the second waypoint, the Las Vegas VOR, and the system assumes we've already passed it. So, right after takeoff, I plan to make a right-hand turn toward the Las Vegas VOR, set a heading of 170, and continue along the route toward the third waypoint. Now let's tune the TACAN unit and set up the HSI. The frequency for the Las Vegas VOR is 116.9, with the corresponding channel 116X mode. We'll set that in the TACAN unit. Switch the navigation mode to TACAN. On the HSI, the bearing pointer will now show the direction to the beacon, along with the distance and course deviation. Using the course knob, set the desired heading, 170. Our takeoff heading is 259, so we'll align the heading marker with that value. Let's check the mission route screen. Beacon IDLAS, radial 1.9 nautical miles. Confirm that the master autopilot switch is in the on position, and we're ready to taxi to the runway. Now, we move on to the takeoff. The B-52 has several important characteristics that every pilot should remember. First of all, the takeoff is always performed with flaps fully extended. If the warning horn sounds and the master caution lights come on as the throttles are advanced, beyond approximately 45 degrees from closed, it means the flaps are not down. Check that the flaps are 100% extended before continuing. The aircraft requires a long runway, especially when fully loaded. In our case, the takeoff weight is about 70% of the maximum, so the takeoff will be relatively easy. But in real operations, B-52 crews often face much tougher conditions: high temperature, crosswinds, or heavy fuel load, all of which increase the takeoff distance. Before takeoff, it's very important to correctly set the center of gravity, using proper fuel tank configuration and stabilizer trim. For this flight, the trim is set to 1.5 nose up. Another thing to remember, the B-52 doesn't have a traditional rotate moment. It simply gains speed and lifts off the runway on its own, with all landing gears leaving the ground almost simultaneously. For this takeoff, we'll use a reference unstick speed of about 176 knots. If needed, you can gently pull the control yoke to assist the rotation. Now let's perform the pre-takeoff checklist. Turn landing, taxi, and crosswind landing lights on for day or night operations unless the reflection reduces visibility. Set the steering ratio switch to takeoff and landing. Gradually advance the throttles to maximum. Remember, the throttle gate limits power to 90% in this configuration. Release the brakes, the aircraft starts rolling and slowly accelerates. At approximately 60 knots, the pilot calls 70 knots. At 70 knots, the pilot confirms by saying "now." At that point, the navigator starts the stopwatch. The navigator announces, "Coming up on 3 seconds." And at V1 speed, he calls "now." Beyond this point, takeoff cannot be aborted. The co-pilot calls unstick speed about 10 knots before reaching V2 speed. At unstick speed, the co-pilot again announces "now." Once airborne, retract the landing gear first. They're large and create significant drag. Next, start retracting the flaps at 180 knots indicated airspeed, with a positive climb rate greater than 1,000 feet per minute, and at a minimum altitude of 1,000 feet. By 230 knots, the flaps should be fully retracted. This prevents unnecessary vibration and loss of lift at transition speeds. The 8 Pratt & Whitney engines generate tremendous thrust in takeoff mode. At lighter weights, the climb rate can easily exceed safe limits. If the normal rated thrust produces more than 4,000 feet per minute climb, reduced power is needed to maintain stability. Landing, taxi, and crosswind light switches off. Set the thrust gate to 85%. This is maximum combat power. Continue the climb and transition to en route flight along the planned route. Autopilot engagement becomes possible at this stage. The climb mode is set using the autopilot pitch control knob, and a vertical speed of approximately 2,000 feet per minute is selected. Using the bank control knob, a right turn is initiated. To clear surrounding terrain, the vertical speed is increased to 3,000 feet per minute. This portion of the flight involves active work with the autopilot panel. 2 switches activate the pitch and roll channels of the autopilot. The adjacent knobs provide manual pitch and roll commands to the system. The aircraft continues its turn toward the reciprocal heading of 350 degrees. After leveling out on the reciprocal, 2 additional turns will be required to intercept the first waypoint on a heading of 170 degrees. An overspeed warning becomes audible. This occurs when the aircraft exceeds the permissible speed limit. The striped pointer, known as the barber pole, indicates the maximum allowable speed. It is dynamic and varies with altitude and outside air temperature. Thrust is reduced to return the airspeed to safe values. The aircraft is leveled, and the trim knob can be centered with a right click. Upon reaching 10,000 feet, Altitude hold mode is engaged. The flight continues toward the first 4 station visible ahead. A right turn of 90 degrees is made to position the aircraft correctly. After stabilizing, another 90-degree correction will be made closer to the station, followed by activation of the station tracking mode. The autopilot performs the turn, and the bank rate may be increased slightly if needed. Once the aircraft rolls out on heading 170 toward the Las Vegas VORTAC, control will be switched to TACAN-based autopilot navigation. As the turn finishes and the aircraft stabilizes on the straight, an important note should be made regarding real-world operation. On the actual B-52, lateral autopilot control is performed solely through the roll control knob. VOR, TACAN, and ILS systems provide only visual guidance. Indications on the horizontal situation display, and director bars on the attitude indicator. They are not directly connected to the autopilot. In this simulator, direct coupling was implemented to simplify navigation, allowing the autopilot to follow the planned route automatically. Regarding director bars, they appear only when required during ILS approaches or in manual heading mode. Approaching the turn point, the bearing pointer aligns with the course. A manual turn is initiated. As the deviation bar centers, the primary coupling switch is engaged. Aircrews commonly refer to this switch as George. George links the navigation system with the autopilot and is set to the bomb position. With this coupling active, the autopilot begins guiding the aircraft toward the first waypoint. In the real B-52, George transfers navigation authority to the offensive team. The navigator and bombardier, who fine-tune the aircraft's course to reach the release point precisely. When switching autopilot modes, especially when activating George, pitch behavior should be monitored closely. During steep bank angles, lift decreases and the aircraft may begin to sink. If required, the pitch channel can be reset manually. A small loss of speed is corrected by increasing thrust. The aircraft approaches the first waypoint with minimal course deviation. The TO/from indicator confirms movement toward the station. Distance and estimated time to the next waypoint are displayed. The Las Vegas VORTAC will be overflown momentarily. To ensure a correct station passage, the heading bug is aligned with the desired course, and manual heading mode is selected. When the VOR-TACAN station is crossed, the bearing pointer rotates 180 degrees, indicating the station is now behind the aircraft. The to/from indicator changes accordingly. In manual heading mode, the aircraft's direction is controlled manually. Moving the heading bug right initiates a right turn. Moving it left initiates a left turn. The next waypoint, destination point 3, identifier GFS, comes into focus. Its frequency and TACAN channel are set. The expected course is 170 degrees, with a distance of 56 nautical miles. Channel 91 X mode is tuned, and the HSI begins displaying received data. Heading mode is disengaged, returning control to the TACAN navigation mode. The autopilot then turns the aircraft back toward the designated course. While we have a moment, I'd like to say a few words about the flight model of this magnificent aircraft. The entire flight model was built using real-world B-52 flight manual data, covering every aerodynamic, weight and balance, and engine parameter in detail. 8 paired engines, 4 main landing gear, struts like those of a heavy truck, and 2 wingtip gears for lateral stability, combined with a narrow fuselage and enormous wings, give the B-52 a truly unique aerodynamic configuration unlike any other aircraft. Sometimes we can find videos made by less experienced sim pilots performing unrealistic maneuvers and then complaining that the flight model isn't realistic. It's important to understand that a realistic flight model can technically allow an aircraft to perform extreme maneuvers, even a barrel roll. However, the real limitation is not the aerodynamics, but the structural load limits of the wings and fuselage. That's why flight manuals include strict maximum G limits and numerous operational restrictions. For the B-52, the maximum positive load factor should not exceed 2 Gs, and the negative limit is about minus 1.1 Gs. If Microsoft Flight Simulator simulated structural damage from excessive G-forces, such extreme maneuvers would simply be impossible. Nevertheless, we're constantly working to make the flight model even more realistic, as close to the real B-52 as possible. When the deviation bar centers, the flight continues along the planned route. VOR and TACAN routing often differs from the magenta GPS flight path. As the aircraft approaches waypoint GFS, the next turn toward heading 252 degrees is prepared, and the heading bug is adjusted accordingly. 5 miles before the next VOR station, manual heading mode is selected again. This allows the aircraft to begin its turn toward the following station with enough time to configure the next navigation segment. The station is close, and the turn toward heading 252 is initiated. Switching to GPS navigation. Flying via GPS is straightforward, though several important conditions apply. The aircraft turns onto the next route segment. The following waypoint is destination point 4, assigned to TACAN channel 79 X mode. Channel 79 is selected, and reception is checked. Because the station is still too far away, the signal has not yet been captured. That's perfectly fine. The autopilot can be switched into GPS mode, which emulates TACAN guidance. Navigation is set to GPS, and a course of 252 degrees is selected. Manual heading mode is disengaged, allowing the flight to continue under GPS guidance. The TACAN emulation line now displays valid information. Waypoint DAG becomes the active target and its parameters appear on the screen. This entire segment is flown under GPS control. One important reminder, GPS engagement works only when the aircraft is already positioned on an active flight plan leg. If the aircraft has drifted away from the route, it must first be manually brought back to the correct track. Only then will the autopilot take over lateral control from GPS. It is also important to note that the GPS system on the B-52 is certified only for en route navigation at altitude. It is not approved for approaches or landing operations. As we head toward the next waypoint, let's take a closer look at the autopilot's steering modes. The autopilot panel includes, among others, two switches, low-level mode and air refuel mode. Before describing these modes, several critical details must be noted. First, all lateral autopilot modes operate only when George is set to the pilot position, the lower position. Second, these modes are interlinked. For example, activating low-level mode automatically disables altitude hold and air refuel mode. Third, any movement of the autopilot control knobs, roll, pitch, or the trim wheel will deactivate currently engaged autopilot modes. Because of this, all these controls must remain centered before enabling the autopilot. Otherwise, the system simply won't engage. Some modes require special activation sequences, which will be covered later. Low-level mode maintains a stabilized pitch and bank attitude. When the pilot sets a specific attitude with the control column, the aircraft continues holding that attitude once the controls are released, with room for minor manual corrections. Air refueling mode functions similarly, but is intended for automatic stabilization during aerial refueling. As fuel is transferred, the aircraft's center of gravity shifts significantly, resulting in heavy control forces on the yoke. The pilot must work the stabilizer trim aggressively, and maintaining stable flight becomes challenging. This mode reduces workload by keeping the aircraft balanced automatically. To activate air refueling mode, the aerial refueling system must be enabled. The master refuel switch must be on, and the refuel door must be open. Once the refueling system is active, other autopilot modes become locked out. While these modes were being explained, the aircraft reached the DAG turn point. To demonstrate additional procedures, the route will be adjusted slightly. We will fly perpendicular to the final approach path toward this point, then make a 90-degree left turn toward Edwards, using the VORTAC beacon EDW for reference, intercept the approach course, and perform an ILS landing on runway 23 left. To initiate this, an almost 90-degree turn is performed. The autopilot has already advanced to the next GPS leg and accounts for the new waypoint. Manual heading mode is selected, a right turn is made, and the flight continues. This portion of the route provides a good opportunity to demonstrate the autopilot's bank and pitch stabilization capabilities. To engage this mode, navigation mode must be disabled. The manual heading switch is set to normal. George is moved to the pilot position, the roll and pitch knobs are centered. And low-level mode is activated. With the system armed, the pilot can establish the desired pitch and bank with the control column. Once the controls are released, the aircraft maintains that attitude automatically. A descent is initiated. After releasing the yoke, the aircraft continues holding the selected attitude. The aircraft is approaching the turn to the final course. Speed needs to be reduced. Interceptors are extended to the first position. A descent rate of approximately 1,000 feet per minute is set. The Vortac EDW is tuned. Channel 11.1X mode is entered, and navigation is switched to TACAN. The course is being approached, but the station has not yet been captured. A turn toward the station begins, and the current altitude is maintained. To make our flight a bit more challenging, let's set up difficult weather conditions for the final leg of the route. In low visibility, the roll of the autopilot will look much more impressive. Descent continues to 6,000 feet. The heading is aligned to 226 degrees. The TACAN signal is expected shortly, and channel 11.1X mode is verified again. The moment the TACAN signal appears, it becomes possible to couple to it using George. The autopilot now begins guiding the aircraft toward the glide slope intercept point for the landing course. Speed continues to be reduced. Instrument lighting is switched on. Bringing the cockpit into landing configuration. The aircraft decelerates to comfortable approach values of 170 to 180 knots. Autopilot tracking remains stable on the navigation beacon, with 23 miles remaining. The ILS frequency for Edwards runway, 23 left, 11.1.10, has already been set. A slight reduction in speed is applied during descent, and the aircraft continues downward. Passing 8,000 feet, the current heading is selected, and manual heading mode is enabled. This makes the transition into the ILS landing mode smoother. The ILS switch is then set to the ILS position. A quick check confirms that the ILS localizer signal is present. Manual heading is disengaged, and control shifts to the ILS localizer. The localizer director bar becomes visible. A glide slope signal has not appeared yet. The red flag indicates that the glide slope is inactive. Moments later, the glide slope signal becomes available. Altitude hold is selected to help achieve a smooth glide slope intercept. For automatic glide slope tracking, the mode select knob is switched to ILS approach. At the glide slope interception point, the mode selector is placed in the ILS approach position. The glide slope becomes captured, and the glide slope director bar appears, showing a stable descent along the ILS path. Landing lights are turned on. All approach and landing lights are activated at once to avoid forgetting any of them. A reminder, B-52 landings are always performed with the speed brakes deployed to the fourth position. This configuration allows more precise speed control on approach using throttle adjustments. The current ILS procedure does not include distance measurement equipment DME, but this is not an issue. The descent is guided by the glide slope indication. Landing speed is checked on the fuel totalizer calculator. The pointer indicates 146 knots. Adding a 4-knot safety margin brings the final approach speed to 150 knots. The landing gear is extended. A quick check on the gear indicators confirms all gear are down. Flaps are set to the full landing position. Those bright lights on the right side belong to the parallel runway. The assigned runway lies directly ahead, although not illuminated. Altitude is monitored on the radio altimeter. By the way, the decision height has been set to 200 feet. This is the altitude at which the captain must confirm visual contact with the runway and disconnect the autopilot for manual landing. The radio altimeter decision light activates. Runway in sight. Autopilot is disconnected. A small power correction is applied. The aircraft is leveled. The drag chute is deployed. Braking is performed along the runway. A successful landing concludes the instructional flight. There is no need to go through the full shutdown checklist in detail. Just a reminder, the engines are shut down by moving the throttle levers to cut off. After that, all remaining aircraft systems, hydraulics, electrical power, and others, are turned off. And don't forget to switch off the lights before leaving the aircraft. Many pilots have drained a battery this way, usually in their cars, not in a B-52. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like. Wishing you excellent virtual flight.